So good morning, everybody. I want to thank everybody at the Zen Center and especially Reverend Tejo for inviting me to give this talk. And I always like to start talks out with generating our motivation. And so let's think that we will listen and share the Dharma today with the motivation of compassion for all living beings and a determination from our own side to follow the path to awakening and attain Buddhahood so that we can benefit all beings most effectively. So let's make that motivation the reason why we're sharing in the Dharma today, and also the motivation for our entire life, so we make our whole life meaningful. Okay, so I'm going to be speaking on the diversity of Buddhist traditions. And as it happened, I wound up writing a book about this together with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I will be sharing some excerpts from the book with you. The book is called Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions. It was published by Wisdom. I think the cover is exquisite. Yeah. And what His Holiness the Dalai Lama wanted was a book that would help the various Buddhist traditions understand each other better, okay, so that in society today we could function as a unity in guiding different things that happen in society. For example, climate change, or speaking out against the destruction of the Buddhist statues in Afghanistan, or many other, issues, international or societal issues, just even war and the capital punishment. There's so many things that as Buddhists we all believe, and it would be nice if we could come together and really speak as a whole regarding that. So I want to start with something His Holiness says at the very beginning of the book about our commonalities and diversities. Okay, so I like to read from the book and then stop and comment on it, elaborate a bit on it. Okay. So he's saying sometimes people mistakenly believe that Tibetan Buddhism, especially Vajrayana, is separate from the rest of Buddhism. When I visited Thailand many years ago, some people initially thought that Tibetans had a different religion altogether. Okay, this is the kind of misunderstanding that you find among the Buddhist traditions. However, when we sat together and discussed Vinaya, Sutras, Abhidharma, and such topics as the 37 harmonies with awakening, the 4 concentrations, the 4 immaterial absorptions, the 4 truths of the Aryas, and the Noble Eightfold Path, we saw that Theravada and Tibetan Buddhism have many common practices and teachings. So on the outside, the robes look different, the chanting is different, there's how the Buddha looks is different, but when you look at the teachings themselves, there's so many commonalities, and we have to come back to see those commonalities. And he continues with Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and many Vietnamese Buddhists. Tibetans share the, I'm sorry, not Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. Tibetans share the monastic tradition, the Bodhisattva ethical restraints, Sanskrit scriptures, and the practices of Amitabha, Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, Samantabhadra, and Medicine Buddha. When Tibetan and Japanese Buddhists meet, we discuss the Bodhisattva ethical restraints and sutras such as the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra. When the Japanese Shingon text, when we meet with those people, we share the tantric practices of the Vajradhatu Mandala and the Vairochana Sambodhi. Okay, so Japanese Buddhism is a little bit different here because in the middle of the 19th century, after the Meiji Restoration, the government wanted to break the power of Buddhism, and so they made all of the monastics disrobe. Okay, and so in Japan, they don't follow the pratimoksha ethical restraints like they do in the other Buddhist countries. In other words, the monastic precepts as set down by the Buddha, bhikshu and bhikshuni, upasika. And instead, in Japan, they have bodhisattva vows, 16 of them, and some of them are similar to the pratimoksha ethical restraints, and others are similar to the bodhisattva precepts that we have in the other traditions. Okay, but even between China and Tibet, there's some difference in the listing of the bodhisattva precepts, but there's also a lot of crossover because both lists depend on the same sutra sources. Okay, so the Brahmanet Sutra and also one of Asanga's text. So they're the Bodhisattva precepts are similar. The Pratimoksha precepts are also very similar between in Theravada Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. So while there are differences in the texts that comprise each canon, okay, there is considerable overlap of the material discussed in them. So the Chinese canon is actually the most complete. It has Pali Sutras in it, which are called agamas in the Chinese canon. And the Chinese canon also has many, many Mahayana Sutras. Okay, the Pali canon has Pali Sutras, okay? Tibetan canon has mostly Mahayana Sutras, but a lot of the commentaries from the Indian Pandits that we study have quotations from the Pali suttas. And so when you look at how Tibetan Buddhism is taught, it's quite clear that the teachings included in the Pali canon are taught in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, so thinking Tibetan Buddhism is some other kind of something is not correct. Yeah. So in subsequent chapters in the book, we will explore some of these similarities and differences in greater depth. But here are a few examples. And here what we see so much is that ideas presented in the early sutras, which comprise the Pali canon, many of those ideas were then elaborated on in the Sanskrit sutras, and the ideas were built on. So you really come to see that how all the Buddhist teachings in these various traditions, come back to the same fundamental principles. That's why we named the book Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions, because all these teachings come from the Buddha. But, as Buddhism spread to different countries, you got many different traditions. Okay, so the Buddha spoke at length about the disadvantages of anger and the antidotes to it in the Pali Suttas. The teachings for overcoming anger in Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara echo these. Yeah. So my book, Working with Anger, not only plagiarized Shantideva, but Shantideva plagiarized the Pali Sutras. So I'm joking, but you can really see the continuity here. Okay, then also one sutra in the Pali Canon recounts the story of the Buddha experiencing severe pain due to his foot having been cut by a stone splinter. Nevertheless, he was not distressed, and when prodded by Mara, who is the personification of all of our internal hindrances, the Buddha responded, "I lie down full of compassion for all beings." So he's experiencing pain. What does he feel? Compassion for all beings. So this is the compassion that is generated when we do the taking and giving, or Tonglen meditation in the Tibetan tradition, in the Sanskrit tradition, where we think that we take on the suffering of others with compassion, and that we give them our body, wealth, and merit with love. Okay, so you see the root in the Pali Suttas. Okay, so furthermore, the altruistic intention of bodhicitta, so prominent in the Sanskrit tradition, is an extension of the four Brahma Viharas, or four immeasurables, taught in the Pali Canon. So the Pali and Sanskrit traditions share many of the same perfections, okay? They both have lists of 10 perfections. The lists have some overlap, but some differences. But even when the names of the perfections are different, the principles that they refer to are also found in the other traditions. Okay. Other things shared between the Pali and Sanskrit traditions: the qualities of the Buddha, such as the 10 powers, 4 fearlessnesses, 18 unshared qualities of an awakened one. All the traditions speak about impermanence, the unsatisfactory nature of samsara, selflessness, and emptiness. So all those teachings are in common, although, for example, the presentation of emptiness and selflessness may be different among the traditions. Okay, so His Holiness says the terms Thai Buddhism, Sri Lankan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, and so on, are all social conventions. In each case, Buddhism in a country is not monolithic and contains many Buddhist practice traditions and tenet systems. So within each country, you have different practice traditions. And within those different practice traditions, you have sub-traditions, okay? And then within the sub-traditions, each teacher may have a slightly different slant on things, okay? Also, the stresses may vary. Some traditions emphasize serenity, or shamatha. Others emphasize insight, or Vipasana. So in Western countries, Buddhism from many different traditions and countries is present. Some groups consist primarily of Asian immigrants, and their temples are both religious and community centers where people can speak their native language, eat familiar food, and teach their children the culture of the homeland. Other groups in the West are composed mostly of Western converts, and a few groups are mixed. Okay, so indeed we are a huge and diverse Buddhist family following the same wise and compassionate teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. I believe our diversity is one of our strengths. It has allowed Buddhism to spread throughout the world and to benefit billions of people on the planet. Okay, so that's just an introduction to the thought here. And I think it's very important that we see the Buddha Dharma in that way. Yeah. There's also, I want to explain a misconception in the West about the Buddhist traditions. We often hear among Western teachers, oh, there's three kinds of Buddhism, okay? Vipasana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, okay? So in the West, that's how they say the three kinds of Buddhism. This is very mistaken, okay? First of all, Vipassana is not a separate Buddhist tradition. It's a meditation technique that is found in every Buddhist tradition. It may be practiced differently in the Theravada tradition and in Zen and in Tibetan Buddhism, but it's a meditation technique. It's not a tradition in itself. Also, Mahayana, okay, they usually say Mahayana is Zen. Actually, Mahayana has a whole lot of traditions under it, okay? And one of the traditions that is a Mahayana tradition is Vajrayana. In other words, Vajrayana is not its own tradition. It's a branch of Mahayana. Chan or Zen is a branch. Pure Land is a branch. Huayan is a branch. Yeah, so there's many different branches of Mahayana. Yeah. Okay, so the way it's thought of in the West it really confuses people, because also people then think that Tibetan Buddhism is only Vajrayana, and it's not. Tibetan Buddhism includes all the fundamental vehicle teachings, all the Mahayana teachings, and then it includes Vajrayana on top of that. Okay, so it's, and like I said, Vajrayana is a branch of Mahayana. It's not something separate from it. Okay, now I want to go into some other interesting things that are shared in the traditions. I must say that I know more about Chinese Buddhism than I do about Japanese Buddhism. Okay, I've been to Japan, and I've met with people who are Shinto and also Zen practitioners, but I'm much more familiar with Chinese Chan. And it's interesting to me because Japanese Zen, which came from China, the word is Chan in Japan, they're quite different. Yeah. So it's interesting just to look at this and see similarities and differences. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about one of the teachings in Chinese Buddhism. I assume it's in the Zen tradition because it's coming from the Chan tradition in China. And that's the whole thing of sudden teachings and gradual teachings, okay? Because there's a lot of discussion about this among the various traditions. So Ji, who was one of the Chinese practitioners, emphasized that successful Dharma practice depends on balancing the quiescence of serenity. Serenity is how I translate shamatha, and the analytical wisdom of insight, or vipassana. Cultivating serenity without the wisdom realizing emptiness does not bring liberation. So you may have actualized the various dhyanas. Dhyana are the meditative absorptions in the form realm, but dhyana is the Sanskrit pronunciation of the Chinese word Chan and the Japanese word Zen, okay, emphasizing meditation. Okay, so If beginners are taught Nagarjuna's view of emptiness, they may not understand it well and may even generate wrong views. Therefore, we must first be well grounded in the method aspect of the path, generosity, ethical conduct, and other practices, as explained by Maitreya and Asanga. And I remember I have a good monastic friend who practices in the Chinese Chan tradition, and I've visited his temple, his Dharma center, several times. And I remember one time walking in, and he was giving a talk, and it was on how to develop concentration, and it was the same method that we describe in Tibetan Buddhism that came from Maitreya. And it was just amazing sitting there and going, okay, I know the next point, because it's explained from the same text. Okay, so since the first 5 perfections without wisdom are like a barren house, incorporating the wisdom of reality into them is essential. Okay, so we need both concentration and wisdom. Through repeated practice, practitioners conjoin great compassion and bodhicitta with all the meditation practices and reflect on the emptiness of the ancient object and action of all the practices they do. So this is talking about the Mahayana tradition, which, is shared with Tibetan Buddhism and Zen, with the motivation of bodhicitta, trying to attain full awakening for the benefit of all beings. And so we definitely share that motivation. In the Zen tradition, they have the 4 great vows. Sometimes it's taught as the 5 great vows by different Chan masters. And when I was working on another volume of this book talking about the development of bodhicitta, and I spoke about the 4 and 5 great vows, the Tibetan Geshe who was reviewing the book read those, and he said, wow, these are amazing. And he had never heard them before, even though they correspond so much with the Tibetan teachings on bodhicitta. So in learning, reflecting, this is all Zhi, the Chinese practitioner. In learning, reflecting, and meditating on Nagarjuna's text, practitioners gain the Madhyamaka view. Since the understanding gained from learning and reflecting is conceptual, they seek the union of shamatha and vipassana in order to generate unpolluted wisdom, directly realizing the 8 negations in Nagarjuna's homage to his Mula Madhyamaka Karika, his treatise on the middle way. So no cessation, no ceasing and arising, no annihilation and permanence, no coming and going, no singularity or pure plurality. Okay. So in China, they had the Madhyamaka school. They also had the Yogacarya school. The Yogacarya school was prominent, okay? In Tibetan Buddhism, most people are Madhyamaka, but we definitely study the Yogacarya. But we follow a different lineage in studying the Yogacarya than the predominant one followed in China. Yeah, it's so interesting when you study Buddhist history, yeah, because it really helps you understand the doctrine better, because you see how different points were emphasized by different people, how different commentaries, one commentary went to this country, one commentary went to the other country, so they follow those various commentaries. So in 9th century China, there was much discussion on the role of shamatha and vipassana. Some Chan practitioners stated that Chan was beyond words and concepts, and thus was beyond Buddhist scriptures. Okay, so we hear this from also in Japanese Zen, from some Chinese Chan people, but not so much in Chinese Chans nowadays, that, Chan or Zen goes directly to the point, because you have Moggallana. Was it Moggallana pointing to the moon, or Shariputra pointing to the moon? Yeah. And that was the direct teaching. And so some people say, well, then you don't need the scriptures, which raises an interesting question. If you don't need the scriptures, why did the Buddha teach so much? Yeah. Okay. So Zongmi, the Huayan's, the Huayan is the, it's one of the Chinese Mahayana schools. Okay, so Zogmi, the Huayan school's fifth patriarch, who was also a respected Chan master, he practiced both traditions, he accepted that final awakening was beyond words and concepts. However, he said that Chan should not disengage from the philosophical traditions of Buddhism that employ words and concepts to lead sentient beings towards the truth. He encouraged practitioners to study the scriptures, and he cautioned that meditation was not about emptying the mind of all thought, but about cultivating the wisdom of reality. This is an important point. Okay. Highly valuing the method aspect of the path, which entails bodhicitta, generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, and so on, Zogmi saw the gradual accumulation of merit as essential for developing wisdom. In other words, you couldn't just sit down and whammo, you got the concentration, you got the wisdom, you had all the merit necessary, to gain full awakening and become a Buddha like that. Okay, so that's how some people think the tradition of sudden enlightenment is. But there are some errors in that tradition, okay, or that explanation. Okay, so Zogmi, who was a Huayan and a Chan master, described two types of sudden teachings, one for beings of sharp faculties, the other as a method of exposition. So the Buddha gave the sudden teachings for those of sharp faculties when he spontaneously and directly revealed the true Dharma to unawakened beings who immediately attained awakening. Okay, so there's many stories in all the traditions of this, and even the Buddha's first 5 disciples, when he taught them, several of them gained awakening after the first teaching. Okay, now here, awakening refers to the first direct perception of reality. It does not refer to complete Buddhahood. So this is one of the misunderstandings. Yeah? For Zogmi, this meant for the first time seeing one's own true nature is and always has been the same as the nature of the Buddhas. So it's the first time you see that. In Tibetan Buddhism, you would say this was the liberated path of the path of seeing. Okay, when you first realize the empty nature of the mind and realize that empty nature the mind has been empty from beginningless time, and now you are realizing that pure nature. Okay, at this time, this is continued with Zogmi, at this time, although a practitioner has an experience of awakening, Here, awakening means direct realization of emptiness, okay? She is not yet fully awakened. She must still remove all afflictions and karmic latencies obscuring the mind. This is done through gradual practice after the initial sudden experience of awakening. So for sharp faculty practitioners, people who are quite bright, yeah, they get this initial realization of emptiness. And then they have to go back and create all the merit necessary by practicing the method aspect of the path, all the virtuous deeds, to accumulate that method so that then they can attain full awakening, okay, and completely purify the mind of all defilements. Okay, so it's an interesting thing, you know. What is meant by sudden awakening doesn't mean all at once you become a Buddha. It's your first realization of emptiness. Then you have to go back and do the rest of the path. Okay, and also awakening doesn't mean full awakening. It means the first direct perception of emptiness. Okay, so sudden teachings are not the same as the highest teachings, which also include teachings given for gradual practice. So the highest teachings can either be sudden or gradual. In other words, the highest teachings could be approached in two ways, either gradually through consistent development or suddenly through a direct experience of reality. Okay, so there's two ways to go about it. Sharp faculty disciples are suited for the sudden teachings, while middle and low faculty practitioners fare better with the gradual approach. The Buddha leads the latter group of middle and low faculty practitioners until they are capable of understanding the teachings on the ultimate meaning. So this is the approach shown in the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra and the Nirvana Sutra, okay, where the highest teaching is expounded in a gradual manner, beginning with how to create the causes for fortunate rebirth by abandoning non-virtue and creating virtue. Sound familiar? This is exactly what the fundamental vehicle says, and you know, the foundation of Tibetan Buddhism as well. I once discussed gradual and sudden awakening in a public forum in New York City with Master Zhenyan, the founder of the Dharma Drum Mountain Organization and a wise and respected Chan master from Taiwan. I was present at that time. Okay, very interesting discussion between the two of them. So Master Zhenyan affirmed that in Chan, awakening refers to having the initial direct perception of emptiness. While Tibetan Buddhists occasionally use awakening in that way, more often we use it to refer to the end point of a path, the arhatship of a Shravaka, or a hearer, or a solitary realizer, for instance, or the full awakening of a Buddha. Okay, so the word in Tibetan Buddhism, awakening, yeah, in different contexts can mean different things. In some contexts, we talk of the awakening of a hearer, of a solitary realizer. Those are fundamental vehicle practitioners. And then the awakening of Mahayana practitioners, which becomes Buddhahood. In other circumstances, when we use awakening, we're referring specifically to Buddhahood. Okay, so you have to see the context there. So understanding the path in light of the differing use of the word awakening, there does not seem to be a big gap between our traditions. To paraphrase what Master Zhenyan told me, at the time of the Buddha, many people attained awakening suddenly after the Buddha spoke only a few words to them. Okay, we have many stories in the Pali tradition about that. Chan's stories of people realizing emptiness after being hit or scolded by their teacher apply only to highly accomplished, exceptional students, said Master Shenyan. Of course, all of us think that we are the highly accomplished, exceptional students, and we wait to be whacked and, kind of, we want our quick, cheap, and easy awakening. Okay. But, Master Shenyan said, not everyone is capable of sudden awakening, and those who are not must begin with the basics of Dharma practice, while those of sharp faculties and good karma may attain awakening quickly or suddenly, they still have to practice the method and wisdom after their first experience of awakening, because they are not yet free of all afflictions. So you may have had an experience of reality, but if you're not free from all of afflictions, you have more practice to do, okay? And the practice is not only the wisdom aspect of the path, but the method aspect, creating virtuous actions. Only with Buddhahood is one free from obscurations, says Master Shenyan. Everyone else practices a gradual path to amass the necessary virtue and wisdom before their awakening. While sudden awakening is possible, it is not easy. It is not like getting something for nothing. People must still keep pure precepts and cultivate bodhicitta, concentration, and wisdom. So no matter what tradition you follow, the three higher trainings, ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom are musts. A few Tibetan texts mention a sudden or instantaneous approach that isn't limited to the structure of the gradual path. So it's seen in the Tibetan tradition too. I read a Kargyu text that explicitly explained Mahamudra as a sudden path. In Sakya writings, we find mention of the simultaneity of realization and liberation. And the Nyingma Dzogchen practice also speaks of this. Tsongkhapa accepts the notion of simultaneity and instantaneous liberation. However, he points out that what appears to be sudden realization is actually the culmination of many causes accumulated over a long time that are now coming together. Okay, so it's not that somebody who has no familiarity with Buddhism whatsoever in any of their previous lives comes to a Zen center, sits down, and whammo, you get enlightened, okay? People who have practiced for a long, long time in previous lives, they have the good karma, they have the familiarity with the realization of emptiness. So then in this life, all those latencies on the mind are easily awakened, and so they can quickly realize emptiness. So they would be considered high, sharp faculty disciples who gain sudden enlightenment. But they still have to go back and practice. Okay, so Tsongkhapa also points out that what appears to be sudden realization is actually the culmination of many causes accumulated over time coming together. This is the case with the Buddha's first 5 disciples who realized emptiness immediately after listening to one teaching on the Four Truths. And it also applies to Milarepa, who had engaged in serious practice for many lifetimes before attaining full awakening in that particular lifetime. So whether we speak of gradual or sudden awakening, accumulating causes and conditions over time is needed for true spiritual development. So, sorry to disappoint you. There's no quick, cheap, and easy way to gain awakening. So you can cross it off your list and get on with doing the things you like to do. It involves, serious practice over a long period of time. So I thought that was quite an interesting dialogue between them, between the Chan and the Tibetan tradition. Okay, then there's another section that I thought to go over about Buddha nature and how Buddha nature is spoken of in the different traditions. Okay, because what we find often is that there's a lot of similarities in the concepts when you learn the ideas, but the language used to explain those concepts can differ and can, if you just look at the word, can give us the wrong, we can note the wrong meaning of those words. Okay, so here in the Chan tradition, they talk about Buddha nature, bodhicitta, and true suchness. Okay, the term suchness comes in the Sanskrit tradition. In most Tibetan traditions, it refers to emptiness. Okay, in Jonang, it has another kind of meaning. Okay, from the perspective of Chinese Chan, all sentient beings have the Buddha nature that is by nature pure. And the Tibetans have that same nature, that same idea. Everybody has the Buddha nature. Okay. There are some schools that say that there's one type of being who doesn't have the Buddha nature, so they cannot become fully awakened Buddhas. Okay, and what keeps them from that is a lot of familiarity with wrong views and grasping at a self. Okay, but both Chinese Chan and Tibetan Buddhism agree everybody, because they have the Buddha nature, has the possibility of becoming a fully awakened Buddha. So here, when they talk about the pure Buddha nature being pure, here pure means it transcends the duality of purity and impurity. Okay, sounds like transcending the duality of absolutism and nihilism. Okay, we always speak of dualities and going beyond them. When the Buddha nature is fully manifested, that being is a Buddha. But because of afflictions and defilements, especially ignorance, Buddha nature is not presently manifest in sentient beings. Okay, that's the Chinese Chan. Pure mind and Buddha nature, okay, refer to the same thing, but approach it from different angles. Okay, this is explaining the Chan tradition. Pure mind indicates that the nature of the mind is not and cannot be polluted by defilements. In Tibetan Buddhism, we may call this natural nirvana, that the mind by its very nature is empty of inherent existence and cannot be, is not by its very nature. It doesn't have the afflictions, the defilements in its very nature. Okay, pure mind indicates, So pure mind indicates that the nature of the mind is not and cannot be polluted by defilements. So the defilements are adventitious, they can be removed. Buddha nature refers to the aspect of the mind that guarantees our potential and capability to become Buddhas. When fully purified, it is called the awakened mind or actual bodhicitta, indicating that when ignorance was present, we did not know our pure nature, and now, with the removal of ignorance, we see and understand it. So Buddha, what they would call Buddha nature, we would, or let's say this, what they call pure mind in Tibetan tradition would be called natural Buddha nature, the emptiness of the mind, or natural nirvana. And what they call Buddha nature, we would call evolving Buddha nature. In other words, all aspects of the mind that can be cultivated and developed that go on to full awakening. So I find this quite interesting, you know, the similarities in ideas and yet the different terminology. You know? From the perspective that unawakened beings do not yet recognize the pure nature of their mind, it is said that they do not have bodhi mind or bodhicitta. Okay? But from the perspective of the fundamental nature of the mind, being pure of adventitious defilements, it is said that they have bodhi mind. Okay. Now you have to remember, in Tibetan Buddhism, bodhicitta can refer to the aspiration to attain full awakening. Yeah. Or that's called conventional bodhicitta. We also speak of ultimate bodhicitta, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. Okay. So bodhicitta can also refer to the wisdom realizing the ultimate nature of the mind. So here bodhicitta refers to the pure mind that can never be tarnished. It is like a pearl that has been covered with mud for thousands of years. Even though it is hidden in the mud and its luster cannot be seen, none of its shining beauty has been lost. It is just temporarily obscured. It can be removed from the mud and cleaned so that its beauty is visible to all. Its luster did not decrease by being covered with mud, and its luster did not increase once it was removed from the mud. Similarly, our Buddha nature is always pure. Its qualities do not decrease when it is covered with defilements, and they do not increase when the defilements are eradicated. So that same thought is used in Tibetan Buddhism when we talk about natural Buddha nature. Okay? And that as ignorant beings, we don't realize the ultimate nature of our mind. Okay? So we flounder in cyclic existence. But that ultimate nature is never has been and never will be imbued with the defilements. The defilements are always adventitious and can be eliminated. Okay, so here again, continuing in the Chan tradition, bodhicitta is Buddha nature. In the Chan tradition, the terms true suchness, Buddha nature, original nature, ultimate reality, pure nature, and so on have similar meanings. Yeah. So this is important because otherwise you pick up a Zen text, you know, and you read these words and you're like, what are they talking about? You know, original mind. What's that? Okay. Well, they're talking about, you know, the natural Buddha nature. To realize the Buddha nature or bodhicitta is to realize that it is uncreated. It does not disappear. It is originally pure. Okay, so it wasn't that the nature of the mind was one time pure and then got defiled. So it's very different from the theistic religions, you know, where God created people pure and then this whole thing with the snake and the apple happened. Okay, so Buddhism does not have that kind of idea at all. Okay. Then Peizhu, a Tang dynasty layman, praised by the Huayan and Chan patriarch Zogmi, explained that bodhicitta must be generated from our true mind, from the pure aspect of our mind that is part of our Buddha nature. It does not arise from identifying with our samsaric body or the obscured mind obsessed by sense pleasure and worldly success. So sense pleasure, worldly success, that's the garbage that is covering the pearl of the mind. Our true body is perfect and complete, empty and quiescent. And our true mind is vast in its scope and imbued with intelligence and awareness. Okay, so talking about our true body, perfect and complete, empty and quiescent, it's clear that is clearly not this thing. Okay, so it's referring, in Tibetan tradition, we would say it would refer to the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya bodies of the Buddha that we, create the cause to attain. Okay. And then the perfect and complete Dharmakaya is replete with countless virtuous qualities. It is empty and quiescent in that it goes beyond all forms and characteristics and is forever free of disturbance. The true mind is vast in that it coincides with the Dharma Dhatu, the sphere of reality. It is imbued with intelligence and awareness because it is focused, penetrating, and clear, investigating illumination. Encompassing great virtuous qualities, it cuts through fallacious thinking, just as the wrong view that things arise from self, other, both, or causelessly. Okay, it's a refutation in the Madhyamaka tradition. Like a full moon obscured by the clouds of afflictions, its original purity will manifest when the afflictions have been abandoned. As said in the Avatamsaka Sutra, the mind, the Buddha, and beings as well, in these three there are no distinctions. The true mind is the same as the essence of the bodhicitta. When we do not see this, we become entwined with false conceptualizations and engage in actions that bind us to samsara. Okay, so there's various differences sometimes in how Buddha nature is described. Some people saying that our Buddha nature is already replete with all the Buddha qualities, and so we are already Buddhas. We just need to clear away the garbage and discover that we are Buddhas. Okay, and some Tibetan traditions speak like that. Then other traditions say the nature of the mind is pure, and we have the potential for all the Buddha's qualities, but we need to practice in order to develop that potential. Okay, so we have the seeds of the Buddha qualities, but practice is required to bring them out so that we actually become a Buddha. Okay, so it looks like these two ways of explaining things are contradictory. Okay, and so some people who have the latter explanation say, well, saying that you're already Buddha is a skillful technique to encourage people so that they see their own goodness and will practice to develop it. Okay. My own idea, okay, this is my personal idea, is that actually when you look at those two ways of either we're already Buddhas or we've got to practice to become Buddhas, in the end, they come to the same point. Because if we are already Buddhas, but the mind is covered in garbage, you still need to remove the garbage to expose the good qualities. So exposing the good qualities becomes the same as developing those good qualities, yeah, in the other traditions. So they whether you speak of attaining awakening as clearing away the obscurations or speak of it as developing the good qualities, it comes to the same point, because you've got to clear away obscurations and develop the good qualities. Okay, so that's my personal way of thinking about it. Okay, so with this, we have finished the talk. And again, I want to thank the Zen Center for inviting me to share some of this with you. I wanted to talk about, something deeper about the traditions than just, sometimes you read books about the Buddhist traditions, and the differences are, well, the Chan tradition bows with their hands like this, and the Tibetan tradition bows with their hands like this, and the way they bow is different, the way the altar looks is different. And this stuff is all superficial. What I think is so interesting is to really get into how do you practice, and how is the path to awakening described? And then when we really talk about it, we see many more similarities. We also see differences. And as His Holiness mentioned, the diversity is also one of the strengths of Buddhism. So with this, let's dedicate the merit. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And let's make special dedication for all of our friends who practice in the Chan or Zen tradition, that all obstacles and hindrances to their practice may be removed, that they may quickly generate bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing the pure nature of the mind and attain Buddhahood.